Hello everyone, this is Derek with Reef Automation. In this video, we're going to go over the top 10 troubleshooting steps for Apex. If there's a specific topic or a specific thing that you're running into with your Apex, take a look at the chapters below in the description so you can get to a specific issue that you're having. So we're going to go through the top 10 troubleshooting Apex. So let's get started with number 1. Okay, for the first one that we're going to go over is, let's say one of your outlets isn't showing up on your dashboard, or let's say something in your dashboard isn't showing up and you're wondering why. So there's a couple things you can take a look at. So if we go to our main dashboard and you go up to the lock button right here, this is going to show you where all of your modules are in the entire system. Your outlets, everything in the whole system is going to show up here. So if you're not seeing it down below, there's a good chance that it's up here in the lock screen. So that's the first thing you need to check. So let's say I wanted 25.1 in my dashboard. I would click it and hold it and put it down in here. Now again, the configuration and everything I'm showing you is with a web browser, but the same is with any type of phone or tablet. It's the same steps. Okay, so you look through your devices and you're still not seeing it. The next thing you want to check is your modules. So you're going to click on the small little gear icon here, and then you're going to click on this guy, which is modules. This is going to show you every module in your system. It's also going to show you the address. So you'll notice that there's also a status icon next to it. So the status icon indicates that it's connected and that it's seen on the system. So that's the first thing you want to check. Now, sometimes you might see a status with a little yellow icon. The yellow icon means that it needs an update in order to be used with the current firmware. So, for instance, my Garage EB8, I'll click on that. That's going to tell you my hardware version, my software version. If it says OK, that means that the version that you have is accurate and working with the current firmware. Now, if it wasn't OK, it would say old here. And you would go up to here and you'd say update software. Once you click on update software, you're going to hit the icon above here, and then it's going to go through its update process. You can also delete the module here. A lot of people ask me, where do you go to delete modules? This is where you go to delete them. So if you're back at your modules here and you see a red X, that means that it's either not in the system, it's not connected properly, you're missing something, it's not powered. It could be a number of different things. It also can mean that you have a module in here that you're no longer using. Let's say you decided to remove something from the system. This is another place where you can go in here and hit delete if it's not in the system anymore. This is also a place where you can configure and name it. For instance, I name this Garage EB8. Check to make sure that the module is there, that your EB8 is there, that whatever you're trying to control is there in the modules first, and then you can troubleshoot from there why it's not showing up. Okay, so number 2 is going to be probe calibration. Specifically, we're going to go into pH. First of all, take a look at it. Mine's right here, and hit the gear next to it. And this is where you go and you would calibrate it. Now, there's 2 different forms of calibration, and this is very important to understand as to why maybe your pH isn't showing up properly. So if you go to advanced, there's a manual calibration. If you go to basic, there's an automatic calibration. Now, when you use automatic calibration, it's going to automatically run you through the steps to calibrate your probe. Now, if you're using the advanced setting, it's going to require you to click on it and basically do different steps in your calibration. But one of the most important things is the temperature compensation, enabled and disabled. So we get a lot of people that will ask me, well, why is my pH off by 0.3 or 0.2? It could be off by much less than that, but that could have to do with your temperature compensation. Now, something to note about temperature compensation is it only will work on the devices that are currently plugged into that particular device. So for instance, I'm using a PM1 here, as you can see. So the PM1 has a temperature probe connection and it has a pH probe connection. In order for the temperature compensation to work with this pH probe, it has to have a temperature probe plugged into it as well. So that's why, since I'm not using the temperature compensation, I have disabled this. And that's one of the things that people forget when they're doing their calibration is if you're using temperature compensation, you need to make sure that the probe is plugged in and it is plugged into the same device that you're calibrating. For instance, if you're using an Apex EL or an Apex, there's a temperature probe in the base station along with the pH probe. But in this case, it's a PM1. Same thing. The temperature needs to be plugged into the main base unit if you want to use temperature compensation. So that's small but handy little tip on using pH. So the next one we're going to go over is a big one, and that's the salinity probe calibration. So if we come back to my system here and we go to salinity, there's a couple things that I can tell you for troubleshooting salinity that are most important. So the first thing that you want to make sure for salinity is that you don't have any microbubbles next to the probe, that it's in a nice turbulent area. And when I say turbulent, you want to have a lot of water flowing through it. You don't want a lot of static water flowing through it. I find it to be much better when you have water flowing through it, and also no microbubbles. Now, a lot of people complain that the salinity is not accurate or that it has a lot of precision issues, but I want you to take a look at my salinity probe. My salinity probe never seems to deviate between 0.2, I would say 0.2 conductivity, as you can see throughout the day. And I've done this by making sure, like I said, that I put my salinity probe in a location that doesn't have a lot of microbubbles. You'll see that my salinity stays pretty much constant all of the time. 31.4, 31.5. Please keep in mind also this is in my fish tank. This is not in a reef tank, this particular salinity probe. But note that there's no bubbles around it. I have a lot of flow going through it, and I don't have any issues. Now, calibrating the salinity probe is also another real important thing, and it goes back to what we discussed earlier with temperature compensation. So if you're using temperature compensation with the salinity probe, the same thing needs to be done, and that is that in my PM2, in my fish tank, I actually have a temperature probe plugged into it so that it can do temperature compensation. And that's what the TC factor is. Generally, 2.2 is the correct number to put here. I haven't really noticed any other number that I need to put here to get the correct and most accurate salinity. Now, keep in mind, if you're not using a temperature probe, you need to make sure that this is set to 0 because you don't want to have a temperature compensation. Another thing that's very important is when you're calibrating the salinity probe, you need to make sure that the temperature probe is physically plugged in to the device that you're using if you're going to do temperature compensation. I made this big mistake where I was calibrating my salinity probe and I hadn't hooked up my temperature compensation or put the probe in the water yet, and that was an issue. So you got to make sure that the probe is in the water. The temperature probe is in the same water as the salinity when you are calibrating it if you're using temperature compensation. So again, that's been my success with the salinity probe, and I hope everyone else out there can have the same success that I've had. Okay, so the next thing we're going to discuss is the when statement. This is something that I get a lot of conversations going about, and it's something that a lot of people have problems understanding how it works, and they have issues with their system. So a lot of people will use the task for their ATO, and inside the task, when you do the task, there's going to be a when statement that's already created for you. Now, in my programming, it's a little more advanced, but in general, it's going to give you a when statement. Now, that when statement is actually going to physically turn off the button or the outlet when that when statement is accurate. So in this case, it's more than 5 minutes, it's going to turn off. Now what happens is it actually does this. It actually turns off the outlet completely. So when that outlet is completely off, your programming no longer works. So if you're going to use a when statement, you have to make sure that if that when statement actually occurs, that you put it back to auto. So just be aware, anytime you use a when statement, the outlet itself is going to turn off completely and not get back to auto on its own. So you're going to need to do that. So that's when you use a when statement. Anytime you use a when statement on any outlet, that's what's going to happen. So that's when statements. Okay, so going on to number 5. Number 5 is going to be another big one, and that is connecting to the system. So I get a lot of concerns or issues where people are having difficulty connecting to the system. So let's first start with a system that is currently connected. So we're going to go over to here to the gear icon again, and we're going to go into the little Wi-Fi icon. Now, if you click on that, that's going to provide you with your IP address in your system, okay? That's going to provide you with your configuration and your device information. The most important thing here is your IP address. Now, if you have your IP address right here, as you can see, you can actually go into a browser and type that IP address in, and that will get you into what we call Apex Local. So this is very similar to that of the Fusion, except for this is your local. There's a few more things you can do here. I have local set up, so it provides me with all my leak sensors, all my salinity sensors, all my real important stuff if I ever need to quickly connect to it. But another thing that's nice about the local is this is where you can actually save your backups and put your restoration as well, and that's in here. And I have a whole video on how to do that. But one thing about local is this will tell you that your Apex is online and functioning on the local network by clicking on the Wi-Fi icon under Fusion and seeing what your IP address. Of course, this is where you can change it as well if you ever needed to change it. You can also change it to Wi-Fi. I'm not using Wi-Fi on mine. But this is where you can adjust those settings. Now, let's just say your Apex wasn't showing up. So we're going to go through that now. So the one thing I would recommend that you do here is download an IP scanner. Now, there's a number of different ones out there. There's Angry IP Scanner. There's IP Scanner Pro for the Mac. There's a number of different ones. So I'm going to show you what I use, and that's IP Scanner for Mac. So you'll notice this is what IP Scanner looks like when you use it. It's going to show you all of the devices on your network. It's going to show you what the MAC address, and it's going to show you what the manufacturer of that device is. Now, in this case, I'm using the Pro version of IP Scanner. Again, this is on a Mac. There's different versions for different things. But you'll notice that if I go to 90, there's my Apex. And you'll notice that the manufacturer is Neptune Systems. It also shows you what your local address is or your host name on the right. Now, this is really nice for troubleshooting because if you're not seeing your Neptune or your Apex on the system or on your network just to begin with, this is a good way of troubleshooting. This way you know what your Apex address is. Now, for instance, I have it set up for 90, but let's say you plug yours in and then all of a sudden you're wondering, okay, where is my Apex? Well, it'll show up in this list, and it will give you the MAC address as well, and it will give you the manufacturer so you can find devices really easily. I love this program, and this is really good for troubleshooting networking issues. Okay, so number 6 is going to be more of a Trident-related troubleshooting. So if you don't have a Trident, you might want to skip this chapter. So Trident. When you have a Trident, it's going to give you this little screen here on the left lower corner here. And what's nice about the Trident is it's got your standard tasks, of course, but there's also some more specific things that you can do. So if you click on it and you click on the little gear icon, you're going to see you can change the mode from automatic to manual. What that means is it's not going to automatically test throughout the day. This means you have to manually test it. You can actually set up it to test right here, and you can set up the schedule. But one thing you have here is Trident. So this is really good for troubleshooting. Let's say your calibration is off and you need to perform a calibration. You can click on this. You can enter the information again. Let's say you needed a factory default. You're trying to restart your Trident. Another thing that's great here is the priming ability. So let's say you were having a Trident that said, for instance, no water line, or the water line is clogged, or something to that nature. You can come in here and just hit sample and hit the above button up here, and that will reprime the sample line, and then you can try to test again. I don't recommend you hitting the reset line unless you're resetting your sample or your waste. But it's really, the priming here is really good. If you're having some issues with your lines, you know, maybe there's a clog, or maybe your line that's in your sump that's getting the sample water maybe got stuck in a filter, I don't know, something happened and you need to reprime the sample line, this is where you would do it. So this is a really good little tip if you need to troubleshoot your Trident. Okay, so number 7 is going to be a really useful tool that I use for troubleshooting, and that is the tree view tool. So a lot of people don't use this, and it saddens me because it's really easy to use once you start using it. So let's say you had a couple things and you were wondering if something's connected, or you're wondering how things are connected in your system, or you just were troubleshooting. You installed your system 2 years ago and you're like, what did I do here? What did I plug into where? So if you go to expand, right next to it is the tree view. Now, I use the tree view for a lot of different things, okay? But what's really nice about the tree view is you can actually click on specific items, especially if you have a larger system. So for instance, I have my fish PM1. It tells me that my fish pH is plugged in there, and I can click right on it, and then I can get to it. Again, a really quick and easy way to get to things also. So here's my FMM1. This is my fish medium, my fish high, my fish cup, and my fish low optical sensors. If I don't know what these are, I can click on the gear icon up here, and it will tell me that this is the FMM 24 volt accessory port on that FMM. If I click on the FMM itself, which is right here, this will tell me what I have plugged into everything. Well, I have optical sensors plugged into everything. So a really useful tool is the tree icon for troubleshooting, because this gives you the ability to see what's going on in your system. And again, you can scroll around. I got a lot of stuff on here, but you can go and click on different things. It tells you what's plugged in. So for instance, if you had a EB4 or an EB, here's my EB842, tells me exactly what's plugged in, and I can go right to it. So really easy and quick way to get to things. Okay, so number 8, more of a basic information, but another thing that people contact me about is alarms. One thing that I'm hoping Neptune sometimes in the future will do is provide you with more than one alarm alert when there are multiple things happening. But in the current firmware, the only ability is to provide one alarm at a time. But a lot of people will say, well, what was the alarm? How do I know what the alarm was? So that's what this guy is for up here. This little triangle with the exclamation point, that's called your alarm log. And what the alarm log does is you can actually see exactly what the alarm was. So for instance, if I go down to yesterday, it says there was an error in my reef ATO. It says that my elements were low, and it tells me when my alarm was on and when my alarm was off. And as I'm sure you've realized as you use Neptune, you get an alert when your alarm also turns off. So this is an alarm statement called alarm is off. Now, what's nice about your alarm log is this is another great tool for troubleshooting, because if you're getting alarms, you're not sure when and how they're happening, you can reference this to your programming. Well, at 6:57 a.m., I got an error on my reef ATO. Well, what happened at 6:57? And then I can troubleshoot from there. So this is alarm logs. Okay, so number 8 is another one that's come up just a few times that I've heard this, but let's just say that your local Apex is working, but for some reason it got disconnected to Fusion somehow. Now, you've probably spent a long time programming your system. You've probably set up everything, and all of a sudden Fusion stops working. This doesn't happen very often, but I've heard a couple stories of it happening. And then what it generally will do is it'll request a token. Now, with the newer Apex, the setup is pretty straightforward. It does all this for you. But let's say you have an Apex Classic. This also would be good information for you, and that's token assignments. So to do this, it's actually quite simple. So we went over how to connect to the local Apex earlier, and that's by dialing in your IP address. So if you go to the Apex local, there's going to be something right here, and that is your token box. Now, your token box might not be here. It might actually be in your locks. So if you go into your lock, if you see this Apex Fusion or token, you're going to want to drag it over here. Now you can see my Apex Fusion is okay right now because mine's connected. When it's not connected, it's going to give you a token number, and that's going to be in this information. Once you get that token number, it's kind of like Bluetooth. You're kind of pairing it to the Fusion, and that's how you do it. And that's how you get your token. It'll be in this little box. And then once you're setting it up, you type in the token, and then voila, your Fusion is connected. So that's pretty simple. That's how you do the token. So the last troubleshooting skill I'd like to teach you guys is energy monitoring. So energy monitoring is a great thing to look at on your Apex if you need to troubleshoot something that possibly you're not sure what's going on with it, such as the pump stopped working, or your pump's acting strange, or possibly just an outlet is out. Energy monitoring is a great tool. So if we go down to the EB832 here, and you can see if you click on it, it'll provide you with all of your outlets here, and you can see what it is currently doing. So for instance, right now it says my alarm bedroom, which is this little alarmer that I have in my bedroom, is currently off, 0 watts. My bubble that I use for microbubbling is also off. But you'll see right here, I am drawing a lot of power out of 82, which I don't know what it is. I might need to go take a look. Why is it drawing so much power? And then if I go down, you can see all my different things that it's drawing. If I click on it again, this also gives you a visual representation of each device. So this is a good way to troubleshoot if something's not working or an outlet's not working, is if you turn it on and it's not functioning, it'll usually just say 0. Another thing you could take a look at is your main energy monitoring, which is right up here, which is the lightning bolt. Go to lightning bolt. It's going to provide you with a visual of your system-wide power. And let's say you had something that produces a lot of power, and during the day you can see it, which I can see it here. This is probably my chiller that's coming on and off. And all of a sudden you no longer see this. That would give you a good indication that something might be wrong. You can also set up alarms. You can also set up specific alerts for when power goes to a certain amount. I have a video on that, which you can take a look at. But this is the gist of troubleshooting power, which a lot of people don't use. So another great feature of the Apex that provides you with that information. So hopefully you liked the video, and if you did, give a big thumbs up. And if you have any further questions or comments, just leave them in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.